My name's Sandra Hamilton. I'm at the Alliance Manchester Business School, and I'm interested in how societies define value and how that's changing. And I first got interested in this at the Vancouver Olympics because I've spent a lot of my life in Vancouver, on Vancouver Island, and I had the opportunity to work on the bid for the Vancouver Games. And in that bid, we were the first Olympics in history to incorporate sustainability. And my interest has stemmed from that because the Vancouver Olympics incorporated social aspects and the environmental aspects of sustainability into their purchasing decisions. I wondered why we didn't do that on all taxpayer-funded contracts. I think it's especially relevant today because governments are wanting business to be more socially responsible, wanting us to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And public procurement, how the governments spend taxpayer dollars, can be up to 20% of GDP in advanced economies. So are we putting our money where our mouth is? Are we aligning our purchases with these grand goals of meeting the SDG objective by 2030? So the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 agenda, every country in the world has signed on to this. So there's a global agreement that this is the way to move society forward. And I think that governments must be setting an example in how we move forward. And how do you do that? You put your money where your mouth is on procurement when you define value. So I think if you look back historically, we had local markets, domestic markets, and countries would design their government procurement to support their domestic markets and to provide a comparative advantage for their domestic companies. The World Trade Organization and the Government Procurement Agreement in 1994 said we're going to have fair competition globally. It was the beginning of globalization, and we moved to a time when advanced economies wanted fair, open, transparent approaches to government procurement, which is excellent, but it also was overly dominated by low bid. So we had that period where we moved from localism to globalism, and now what we're looking at is after the pandemic, are we going to go back to localism and locally protected domestic markets, close our borders, or is there a way forward to define value on those non-financial, social and environmental objectives? So what I'm advancing now is the idea that the World Trade Organization and the Government Procurement Agreement specifically, that not only may consider environmental, but must consider environmental and social criteria in all taxpayer-funded contracts, and that might be the next way forward. I think there's some really interesting examples of advanced economies moving far beyond the WTO and the current government procurement agreement. And what we're seeing is 4 emergent themes that this paper discusses. The first one is the move to mandatory, sustainable, or social value public procurement. And I think countries are saying we can no longer rely on the voluntary approach, and we must, in legislation and in policy, consider social and environmental criteria in our evaluation of taxpayer-funded contracts. So the move to mandatory is one of the themes. And the countries that would be leading there would be the Netherlands, Japan, which Japan started green public procurement mandatory in 2001. And today, the United Kingdom is a world leader in mandatory social value public procurement. So mandatory is the first theme. The second theme is the more legislation in supply chain, so due diligence legislation. And what we're seeing here is that supply chain risk is moving from reputational to legal liability, even to the imprisonment of company directors and fines. And here we're seeing France, Germany, and Norway are leading in supply chain due diligence legislation. So public procurement can be asking for more transparency in these taxpayer-funded supply chains. The third theme is we don't actually know how to do this. So we're learning as we go, and we need knowledge hubs. And what we're seeing is countries are creating knowledge hubs that I say the Netherlands and Germany have done a really good job of creating multi-level government knowledge hubs to help central and local governments understand how to do this. But then we're also seeing international cooperation across borders. Canada and the US are leading a global greening of government initiative. So countries are really working together to figure out how to build this knowledge. And the fourth theme would be future generations and the Welsh government looking at well-being economics. So we have New Zealand, Iceland, Scotland and Wales collaborating on economics that have people at the centre, and I think that's really promising. All of that is not yet present in the government procurement agreement, and that's all providing a good way forward. The pandemic has been incredible in public procurement. It has brought it centre stage. We've seen it make major headlines for often bad reasons, but I think it's made us question how society defines value, and there is a lot less focus today on price. We're looking at resiliency. Can we actually get the supplies? How far away is that global supply chain? How long is the supply chain? So then we're going to see a shortening of supply chains. We're going to see less focus on price, and we have already in both public sector and private sector supply chains seen a rise in corporate social responsibility and resiliency, and price becoming less important since 2019 to 2021 today. So what I'm working on currently is developing a theory of priceless procurement. I'm specifically interested in the public sector. That's the focus of my research. And in priceless procurement, I argue that we always know the budget. We know how much money we have in the public sector, and often price is in fact the most constraining factor. So could we stimulate and build capacity to evaluate on social and environmental non-financial criteria if we remove price from the equation altogether? Let's tell the market how much money we've got and reward the rise to the top, most sustainable, most socially responsible firms who are helping us to achieve public policy goals and move away from that race to the bottom, singular focus on low bid. So it is a difficult process, and there are a few key components that are needed. One, you need a strong legislative framework. So procurement has been known for being a risk-averse function, and this culture has been in place for 40 years. And I think that the United Kingdom, in mandating social value public procurement, is saying you must start to learn how to define value differently and balance people, planet, profit. No longer acceptable to exploit people and planet in the pursuit of a low bid price. You know, this initiative, this move to social value procurement was led by regions like Manchester. And specifically the City of Manchester is a leader in this area. So local governments have been the early adopters. And at the City of Manchester today, 30% weighting is required on social value. Other areas like Stockport, Trafford, Tameside and Rochdale will require 20% social value. That idea that resonated locally has now been taken up by the UK central government and mandated nationally in central government. And I think what's really exciting is that it's effective April 2022, the NHS, do no harm, healthcare, will be required to consider social value in all NHS procurement. And that's really exciting because that's the largest health service in the world, redefining how value is defined to address health inequalities. And hopefully if we can start treating people and planet, air quality, water quality better, we can create a better future for future generations.